Welcome back to Journalistic Living. In our last episode, we talked about the difference between feeling stuck and actually being stuck. And maybe since then, you have started noticing the patterns, the roles you fall into, the moments where you stop yourself from fully showing up. But here's what often happens next. Even when we know something needs to change, we struggle to move forward. You are listening to episode 3 of Journalistic Living. And today, we are exploring why change can feel so difficult, even when part of us already knows it's needed. You ready? Let's go. Welcome to Journalistic Living. I am Madeline, your host. I walked away from feeling stuck to creating a life that truly feels like mine. And this podcast is where I share that journey through real conversations about personal growth, positive change, and becoming who you're meant to be by living a life that's rooted in intention, authenticity, and purpose. Join me in this adventure, and I promise you, you will discover your own way to possibility. One of the strangest things about change is that even when we know something no longer feels right or is just not working the right way, part of us still wants to hold on to it. It's not because we are weak, not because we are lazy, definitely not because we secretly want to stay unhappy, but because what's familiar feels emotionally safe, even when it drains us, and even when it hurts us, and even when we know deep down we have outgrown it. And this happens in relationships, jobs, family dynamics, patterns of communication, even in the way we think about ourselves. Because the mind naturally wants certainty, predictability, familiar ground. And change? Well, change asks us to step into something unknown. And unknown can feel terrifying, even when it's healthier for us. But here's the hopeful part. Just because something feels unfamiliar doesn't mean it's wrong for you. It could just be that it's been so long since you were able to express yourself, to have your own voice, and to use that voice to share your needs and your wants. Let me bring this into something real. Imagine someone who has been thinking about changing careers for years. Not because they hate what they do, but because something about it no longer feels aligned. Maybe they feel drained, disconnected, uninspired. And every once in a while, they start imagining something different. A different environment, a new exciting opportunity, wanting to find their passion again. And one day, they finally sit down and do it. They open a laptop and sit there staring at all the information on the screen. Their heart starts beating a little faster. They pull up a job application, update the resume they haven't looked at in years. And for a moment, something about the possibility feels different, lighter, more open, more like the version of themselves they've been missing. They can almost picture it, waking up in the mornings feeling more connected to their life, feeling more present, more energized, more themselves again. And even though that feeling only lasts a moment, something inside them recognizes it. But then doubt starts creeping in. What if I fail? What if I regret this? What if I'm not actually capable? What if I lose stability? And suddenly, the life or situation they want to change starts feeling safer than the unknown possibility in front of them. So they close the laptop, tell themselves they will revisit it later. And the next day, everything continues as normal. And maybe that's what makes change so emotional sometimes, because for a brief second, you can actually feel what life might look like on the other side of your fear. Not perfect, not magically easier, but more aligned, more connected, more true to who you are becoming. And once a part of you experiences that possibility, it becomes difficult to completely forget it again. Not because they don't want change, but because something inside them is still emotionally attached to what feels familiar. It's part of the role they have grown into. What if you are in a relationship that needs some change and you were on a computer looking for a couples therapist, but instead of following through, you started doubting yourself? See, no matter what the situation is, it's important to understand that awareness alone does not automatically create movement. You can know something needs to change and still feel emotionally pulled towards staying the same. And this is where a lot of people become frustrated with themselves. They think, what's wrong with me? Why can't I just do it? Why do I keep going back to the same? What if nothing is wrong with you? What if part of you is simply trying to protect you from uncertainty? Because for many people, their current patterns were built for survival, not freedom, not authenticity, not joy. Survival. And survival patterns don't disappear overnight just because awareness shows up. Sometimes they hold on tighter, right before change begins. This is why people sometimes return to relationships they already knew were unhealthy. And that includes jobs too. Why do people stay silent, even after realizing they need to speak up? Why do they continue overworking, overgiving, overperforming, even after recognizing the damage it's causing? Because the familiar version of yourself still feels safer than allowing yourself to grow. And that creates an internal conflict. One part wants a change, while the other part wants familiar. One part wants honesty, the other part wants predictability. And then a doubt sets in when a voice in your head whispers, but what if this gets worse? And maybe this is where we want to reconnect with something from the last episodes. Those 3 words you chose, the ones that represent who you are and how you want to move through life. Maybe your words were honest, grounded, peaceful, connected, courageous, kind, authentic. Whatever your words were, think about them for a second. Because if those words truly reflect who you are, then the question becomes, what keeps pulling me away from living them? What keeps me quiet when I want to be honest? What keeps me disconnected when I want to be grounded? What keeps me performing when I really want to be more authentic? And often, that answer has less to do with capability and more to do with fear. fear of rejection, fear of uncertainty, fear of failure. And sometimes even identifying those 3 words can feel difficult. Because after living inside certain roles for so long, many people stop connecting with who they are beneath them. They become deeply connected to what they do, what's expected of them, who they have needed to be to function, succeed, lead, provide, and survive. And over time, identity can slowly become attached to performance, to being capable, dependable, composed, useful, needed. Not because those things are wrong, but because eventually it can become difficult to separate who you are from who life has required you to become. And that can be a bit confusing. And that's why this kind of reflection matters. Because underneath all the roles, all the responsibilities, all the expectations, there's still a real person there. And I hope that being part of this journey will allow you the time to process and reconnect you with yourself again. Life coaching is actually about slowing down long enough to process your life with intention, not simply reacting to immediate problems. It helps us reflect and build an understanding of the depth that change, for example, entails. Now, if we don't understand this internal conflict that happens, we start judging ourselves for it, instead of learning how to move through it with compassion. And this is where journalistic living becomes even more important, because this journey is not about forcing yourself into a new life overnight. It's about learning how to stay connected to yourself while moving through uncertainty. That's the deeper work, not becoming fearless, but learning how to move forward even while fear is still present. And you can do that, even slowly, imperfectly, even one small step at a time. Because growth is not about becoming a completely different person. It's simply about becoming more honest, more connected, and more aligned with who you already are underneath everything else. Sometimes the hardest thing about growth is grieving the version of yourself that helped you survive. Even if that version no longer fits you now. The people pleaser, the emotionally guarded version of you, the version that stayed quiet to avoid conflict, the version that kept everyone else comfortable. Those versions of you existed for a reason. They protected you at one point in your life. But eventually, there comes a time where survival patterns start blocking connection instead of creating safety. And that realization can feel emotional, because growth often asks us to loosen our grip on identities we have carried for a very long time. But that doesn't mean you're losing yourself. It means you're finally making space to become more fully yourself. And maybe that's where you are right now. Maybe part of you already knows something needs to change, but another part of you still feels scared to let go of what's familiar. And if that's true, I want you to hear this clearly. That does not mean you're failing. It means you're human. And being human means growth can feel messy sometimes, uncomfortable, uncertain, emotional. But it also means you're capable of change, more capable than you probably realize right now. So today, instead of asking yourself, how do I force myself to change? I want you to ask something different. I want you to ask yourself, what part of me is afraid to let go and why? Don't ask with judgment, not with shame, just curiosity. Because awareness without compassion can quickly turn into self-criticism. But awareness with compassion, that creates understanding. And understanding creates movement. So, here's your action step for today. Think about one area of your life where part of you already knows something needs to change. Maybe it's how you communicate. Maybe it's a habit. Maybe it's how you speak to yourself. Or maybe it's how often you abandon your own needs just to keep peace around you. No matter what it is, instead of immediately asking, how do I fix this? Slow down for a second and ask yourself, what feels difficult about changing this? What feels scary about it? What am I afraid might happen if I actually change? Maybe you're afraid people will react differently. Maybe you're afraid of disappointing someone. Or maybe you're afraid of conflict or that you will fail. Maybe you doubt yourself and think, what if I try and nothing actually gets better? And maybe part of you has simply lived one way for so long that even a healthy change feels unfamiliar. But don't let discomfort convince you that growth is impossible. You are more capable of change than fear wants you to believe. So don't judge whatever answer comes up. Just notice it. Because understanding your resistance is often the beginning of understanding yourself more deeply. And once you understand what fear is protecting, you can start responding to yourself with more compassion instead of criticism. And that's where real change begins. Not in forcing yourself, but in finally understanding yourself clearly enough to move forward differently. And that honesty, that's powerful. Because every meaningful change starts somewhere. Usually not with a giant leap, but with a moment of truth. A moment where you stop pretending something feels okay when it doesn't. A moment where you stop abandoning parts of yourself. And maybe that awareness is not here to punish you. Maybe it's here to reconnect you to the version of yourself that's been waiting underneath all the survival patterns all along. And here's something important to remember. Change doesn't happen in one giant moment. It happens in smaller moments. Moments where you respond differently than you used to. Where you speak instead of staying silent. Where you choose honesty over comfort. Where you stop abandoning yourself. That's how change begins taking shape. One step at a time, intentional, through one decision at a time. And those small decisions matter more than you think they do. Because over time, they begin changing the relationship you have with yourself. So today, your next step is not supposed to be a giant leap. It's simply being honest with yourself about what's keeping you emotionally attached to to what no longer fits with who you are becoming. In our next episode, we're going to go even deeper, because once we understand resistance, the next question becomes, how do we start rebuilding trust in ourselves again? Because sometimes the reason we stay stuck is not because we don't know what to do. It's because somewhere along the way, we stopped trusting our own voice. And that's what we are going to begin exploring next. As we close out our session today, don't forget to follow Journeylistic Living so you don't miss what's coming next. Feel free to share with the rest of us your thoughts about your own struggles with change. And don't forget, take a breath, trust the process, trust yourself, and keep moving forward. This journey is not about perfection. It's about becoming more connected, more intentional, and more honest with yourself. Until next time, keep discovering your path to possibility. Let's go.